Welcome to Perspectives El Paso. I'm Leon Blevins, Professor of Government at El Paso Community College. I have been such since the fall semester of 1972. I have not changed my name. I have the same name that I've had all along since that time. Prior to that, I was at other universities, including Texas Western, now UT El Paso. I have an interesting guest today, and his name used to be Wendell Bandy. Wendell A. Bandy. Look, Master Sergeant Wendell A. Bandy, United States Air Force. But he's not the same person today that he was then, or is he? He just has a different name. Mr. Bandy, or whatever your name is.
BeMende.
Now you're going by BeMende.
Absolutely.
Now, why in the world? Are you in trouble with the law or something and you're changing your name?
Nothing as dramatic. I began an interest in genealogy. So I began to do my family search, and I discovered what I call my true heritage.
Oh my.
Yes, yes. And because of that, I changed my name to reflect where I'm from.
Where are you from?
The area of Liberia and Sierra Leone.
Okay, turn that globe around so they can get it on a camera there, maybe.
Yes,
okay.
I've grown.
Between Liberia and Sierra Leone.
Well, in that area, because that area at the time of my great-grandparents was not Liberia or Sierra Leone.
Oh, right. There were a lot of colonies over there operated under the authority of European powers.
In other parts of Africa.
Yeah, in other parts of Africa.
Yes, in other parts of Africa. But in this particular part of Africa, it was the Songhai Empire. Mm-hmm. And I discovered my heritage and changed my name. My name is now Wacinque Amistad Kaizen BeMende.
It's easier for me to remember this. Now, what did your other relatives feel about this? How did they feel about you changing your name?
Well, they know me. And I've had an interest in history since I was a very little kid. Since the first time I saw a library, which was on the way to the grocery store, mm-hmm. I went into the library and they had a display of soldiers defending a fort. And just so happened these soldiers were black. They were U.S. colored troops.
Okay.
And it was Fort Negley.
Okay.
And I fell in love with history, and especially African American history. And so as time went on, and I joined the military, I began to want to know more about my particular heritage. And I did start the journey of doing genealogy, okay. And discovered my connection to
okay,
West
the audience would like to know, where were you growing up? Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? And how did you end up in the Air Force?
Okay, I'm originally from Nashville, Tennessee.
Okay.
I grew up there until I joined the military in 1975. I'm still in the military today. I'm in the Army, and I'm about to retire. So I have 40 years of service. And
you switched from Air Force to Army?
No. Well, actually, in 1975, I joined the Marine Corps.
Oh my, you're confusing me.
That's why I have the symbol of the Marine Corps on this globe,
okay, yeah.
Part of my travel. So I was in the Marine Corps from 75 to 80, and then joined the Air Force in 1980.
Are you having trouble discovering yourself?
Well, I find life is a journey.
It is.
And so along this journey, one meets either hurdles or turns in the road, and I took various turns in the road.
Okay, now how then did you get into genealogy? You said because of your family background and your interest, and then you started going to the library and checking sources, your family sources.
Well, I am from Tennessee, and so one of the most famous genealogists of the day was Alex Haley.
Right.
And of course, after I'd been in the service 1 or 2 years, Roots came out.
That was a TV series.
Absolutely. And as a person who loves history, and I've been loving history, like I said, since I was a young kid, 9, 10 years old, Roots had a big influence on me.
Sure.
But I didn't immediately start the search at that time. Mm-hmm. Eventually, I moved to Kansas City, and Kansas City has genealogical research sources like Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. So it was in the middle 80s that I decided, you know what, I'm going to actually take that step to start the search to discover my true roots. But in the back of my mind, the whole time was influences like roots, influences like the display about the soldiers defending the fort. And because I was in the service at the time, I continued to pursue that knowledge and so forth, and end up discovering my heritage. And of course, I reached the maximum time I could serve in the Air Force, which was in 2007, and I was facing retirement. The paperwork had actually arrived.
Oh my.
And I just decided I wasn't ready to retire yet. So I joined the Army.
That's an interesting story itself, even if we don't get to genealogy. Now then, tell me about maybe one or two of the most interesting things you found out about your ancestors.
Well, I found out that we were a member of a tribe called the Mende tribe. And one of the members of the Mende tribe is a gentleman named, well, his name was Singbe P.A., but he's known in history as Wacinque. And the part of history he's known for is called the Amistad Incident.
Right.
Yes. Of course, this was a period after slavery had been outlawed. And so because he had a warrior background, and of course I'm serving in the military, he found a way to resist the enslavement, and he overtook the ship and tried to sell it back to Africa. And so because I'm reconnecting myself to Africa, I identified with him in a lot of ways.
Oh my goodness.
And so my name is Wacinque Amistad. I took the name of the ship. The ship for me means traversing a difficult journey. And all of life can be symbolically a difficult journey. And so that's the connection to my known history as a member of the Mende tribe, and so forth.
Now, my wife asked me to ask you a question.
Sir?
And when she asked this, she said it kind of like this: where do I start?
Well, people do feel that way when you're doing traditional genealogy. And I must say traditional genealogy because there's another way to do your genealogy. In the traditional way, you start with your parents. You discover who your mother, well, you know who your mother and father are, but then your maternal mother, grandfather and grandmother, your paternal grandfather and grandmother. And what helps in this process is the census records. So the census records are released every 72 years. So now we're in the early 1900s, census records, and that's recent. And people begin to look in the census records to identify their parents or grandparents, and that opens the journey. Now, another thing that helps today is the internet. On the internet, there are companies that have gathered the family histories of literally millions of families, and they are willing to open that up to anyone else. And so you may find aspects of your journey that's already worked.
Now, several years ago, 2012, I believe it was, I had P.L. King. Do you know him?
Oh,
He does
yes,
genealogy
I do.
here in town.
He's a good friend of mine. I've taken classes that he had because he's a wonderful instructor of genealogy search. He's done his genealogy search himself, and I took his class.
Now, he mentioned, the reason I mentioned this, you
Yes.
mentioned the census. He spent a good deal of time talking about the census of 1940 and the significance of that census, and a lot of information being gathered that he was able to draw from.
Yes, some censuses have more additional information because it identifies more information about the person, like maybe what their occupation, the brothers and sisters. Some censuses are just minimal,
Right.
and then some of them are expansive. And you really get a lot of data from that. But today, the most important way to do it is by DNA. There are 4 companies that primarily do the actual testing. It's National Geographic, a company called 23andMe, a company called Family Tree DNA, and Ancestor DNA.
Yeah, you got some books. Show us some books.
Yes, I did my research through National Geographic. And what I wanted to mention was that another writer who talks about family and so forth is Baha'u'llah, and he says that the earth is but one country and we are all its citizens. And that fits right well with this effort to do your DNA. When I did my DNA, I discovered that I'm 88% African, West African, but I'm 8% West Asian. I did not realize this until the DNA results. And last but not least, I discovered that I'm 4% Scandinavian or Viking.
Now, how did that come into your history?
Well, you know, my people are on the coast, and Vikings seem to travel by water a lot way back when.
All right.
And so they somehow found the west coast of Africa, amazingly. And of course, the funny thing about it, my friends who know me, is I've been a lifelong Viking fan. Now, I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, so we didn't have a football team.
You're talking about a sports team, yeah?
Yes, the NFL Vikings.
It was in your DNA.
And little did I know. So growing up in Nashville, we didn't have a team. I fell in love with the Vikings. And now I realize, wow, I'm actually part Viking. So you never know where the road of life is going to take you.
It's a serious subject, but you can find a lot of humor in it sometimes.
You can definitely find a lot of humor in it.
Oh, my goodness. Well, years ago, I was teaching in Deming, New Mexico. I taught high school history and drama and things like that. And in a junior history class one time, I mentioned that I just finished reading a book, a biography of Thomas Jefferson. And I mentioned that the latest biography had said something about him probably fathering a child by a 16-year-old girl,
yes.
Sally Hemings and so on.
Sally Hemings.
Suddenly a young man jumps up at the back of the room and said, "That's un-American to talk about them, and that's un-American." And he ran down to the principal's office to tell on his new teacher, it was early in the semester, that I was un-American because I was telling that story.
Oh my goodness.
Now I could say, let me show you some DNA results.
Absolutely.
It really happened.
It really did. So what started this DNA is National Geographic. They did a study called The Journey of Man. Mm-hmm. And they took DNA samples from people all around the world. And this started this search. These other companies, then they started adding that to their, what they could offer. And also recently, Discover Magazine did a collage where they said, okay, we are made up, each person has in their DNA profile really a mixture of the races. So God has a sense of humor. We could look like this.
There's no pure blood anywhere.
There's no pure blood. But he could make all of your background show for you at once. But that's where it comes from. That's why, I'm 88% African, but I'm 4% West Asian, that's India, southern India. And I show this on the map here where somebody journeyed from southern Asia, India, and then the journey from Scandinavia or the Vikings, and then all the way over to the U.S. is kind of my family journey in that sense.
Now, do you go to genealogical meetings, conventions, and you learn at some of those places?
Oh, those are wonderful places to go. I attended the one that was recently held in San Antonio, one of my favorite cities to visit.
Okay.
And there's one coming up in May that's going to be in St. Joseph, Missouri by the National Genealogical Society.
Okay, here we are in April of 2015.
Yes.
So you're talking about coming up real soon on that.
Yes, in next month in May. So you learn a lot because you have all the people, or a lot of people at the time, who are interested in genealogy. So you have many people to talk to and pick their brains and things of that sort.
Is there a number or website you'd like to give to people so they can start connecting? Where do you begin?
Yes, like I said, there's 4. So you can Google National Geographic DNA.
Okay.
You could Google Ancestor DNA, 23andMe, and Family Tree DNA. But last but not least, on the 6th of June, I'm hosting an event called the Global Family Reunion. And this is going to be on the 6th of June. It's going to be at the El Paso History Museum from 10 to 2, at the Resiliency Center on Fort Bliss, and at the McCall Center from 4 to 6. This is an event celebrating our heritage, our DNA heritage. and that is called the Global Family Reunion, .com. And you'll find additional information on that website about how to do your search, how to connect with people and so forth. And then, of course, if you come to the event, you'll meet people locally. One of the people that's going to be at the event is a librarian who's done her research. There's a professor at UTEP that's amateur genealogist. P.L. King is going to be there. So this is going to be a great, fun way to learn more about how to find your family search.
In looking at that globe, let's say I go to a meeting with you like that, and that globe is empty of any strings.
Oh, yes.
And then you took just, say, 20 or 30 or 40 people and say, okay, trace your threads, put from here, a little point of whatever, to here, before it would all be over, it would be like a big spider web over the whole globe.
And that's how the journey of man occurred. We started in one place. We started in Africa, and since then, the wandering souls of human beings have populated the entire earth.
I was just discussing today in class, we're on the domestic environment, and I mentioned that for thousands of years, human beings were hunters and gatherers. They were moving around, following the herds, following the weather and the water and everything, and so they began to spread their own, I didn't use the term DNA, but their own characteristics all over the world.
Yes, they were spreading their characteristics through DNA, yes.
That's right.
And that did not slow down until 10,000 years ago. So the journey began 60,000 years ago. So for 50,000 years, we were hunter-gatherers. Then 10,000 years ago, we discovered agriculture.
Exactly.
So this is the journey. So for 50,000 years, the people of the earth were wanderers.
Well, today I also point out in classes that the census of 1920 was the first census in which they said most Americans now lived in towns and cities. Prior to that, most of them lived on the farms and ranches and were moving around. And then agriculture changed everything, and irrigation began to change everything.
Yes.
It changed the way we are and where we live.
Yes, it has, and it's made us more in local communities. And that the way they were able to identify how to match up our DNA is they've gone back to these different communities around the world, and there are a lot of people who didn't move. So from those groups of people that did not move around, and then you match that with the people who have moved around, and you can tell your individual journey, where the places that you may have, your family may have traveled in near time, like 1,000 years ago, 800, 700.
Now, I grew up as a young child, through my teenage years, with a number of family reunions.
Yes.
As we've gotten older, family reunions have toned down. We don't have as many as we used to. Have you been going to a lot of family reunions over the years, when you could, in spite of your military service there?
Yes, my family has been actively having family reunions. And you end up with about 10 or 12 names of the reunion. And I have family, well, mainly we were, my father and grandfather were in Alabama, West Georgia, and then with the migration in time in the 30s and 40s, some family members moved north, Chicago, Detroit, places like that. So now our family spread out. So we have family, we travel around different locations in having our family reunions.
My wife Shanna has a problem on her side of her mother's family, in that her grandfather kind of disappeared from the scene.
Sure.
And very few people knew any records available and so on. So it might be that DNA would be the way that you'd have to track some of that down.
And that is the power of the DNA, because it can tell parts of that story. Plus, it helps connect you with people who have done other parts of their story. And if you know, now this is only if you choose to do this. It doesn't automatically do this. It allows you to connect to other webs. And if he had brothers or sisters, see, their DNAs are going to be similar.
Oh, okay.
And that will allow a person who's not familiar with their particular family line to then connect and discover it. And also, a lot of data has been placed digitally. So military records, pension records, and of sorts are now digital, and they're able to connect it that way, because he probably worked somewhere that has his information and so forth. So the key is the DNA search has really opened it up.
Now, before DNA and before the internet, there was a relative on my mother's side of the family that did a lot of research and came out with a big book, and I have a copy of it at my house.
Those are priceless.
A number of pictures and so on. And they traced our family back to someone named True over in England many hundreds of years ago. But someone was a spark plug enough to start collecting and saving. I teach that people have their own stories to tell. They should tell it. And don't just tell it on something that is perishable, such as VHS tapes and so on like that, and cassette tapes. At some point you need to get it in print and get it spread to members throughout your family, so that if one place burns, somebody else in the family still has a copy of your story.
That's so important. And you want to thank that person and thank them for that legwork that it used to require to do that. And some of the stories get told. And like one story that I'm telling is about the African presence in Mexico. And not a lot of records are written, but there's a little bit, and there's pictures and so forth. But with DNA, you can know a little bit about whether or not that connection is still present today.
Just a few weeks ago on one of our local television channels, a news reporter was over in Juarez and was delivering a report on that very subject. African Americans in Mexico.
Right. How about that? That's very fascinating, because most people don't encounter Mexicans who look like me, but they're mostly in the southern part, near like Guatemala, and there's a country called Belize.
Yes.
Belize is 80% of African descent.
I had a student about 20 years ago her father was American military, black.
Yes.
And her mother was Belize.
Oh,
and she was born in Belize.
Yes.
Lovely, lovely lady.
Yes. And Panama is another country that due to the building of the Panama Canal, which is now being expanded, a lot of people of African descent from the islands worked there, and so forth, and stayed and there, of course, over 100 years ago. So this is how people have traveled and spread their genes around the world. Now,
what other adventures are you looking toward uncovering in your own genealogy? A little niche there that you still, something is loose in there.
Well, now that I've discovered the Indian part of my roots, I'll need to go visit India and look more into it. I had already had an interest in the Vikings and had studied some of the, who doesn't like Thor and the Avengers now with some of the Norse. You know, we grew up with Roman
it's a macho thing.
and Greek gods. And I used to think, well, where are the Norse gods? And now we have a little bit of that with Loki and characters like that. So now I have to go to India and look into that part of my heritage.
Are you married? You have a wife and a family?
No, I'm single.
You're single.
I'm single.
That's the reason you're so free and able to travel all these places.
Free and able to travel.
and sometimes at government expense. When they're sending you on military adventures, they're paying for you to go somewhere.
We won't mention that. I've been to a few places on those type of trips.
Yeah, right. Well, this is fascinating to me, and I know, like I said, only one side of my family. I don't know anything much at all about my father's side of the family. And so that one needs to be researched.
Yes,
I need to put you on the trail of that. We'll do some DNA and
absolutely
send you to Arkansas.
I would love to travel. You know, they have a program on PBS called the DNA Travel.
Okay.
Yes, there's the road show, the genealogical road show.
Yeah, I'm still having to work, make a living. I'm going to retire next year, about this same time of the year. And I don't know if that's how I want to spend my time. But I have written my autobiography, and now I'm putting pictures in place to that, to go with that.
See, that'll help some future genealogists.
That's right.
Absolutely.
And I know what a lot of my relatives look like. Some of them look like me.
Okay.
And some did not.
Right.
Any last words? We have about 2 minutes to go.
Well, like I said, I would just encourage everyone to do their genealogy search. It's so much fun. You know, there might be a Viking lurking, not a cowboy, but a Viking. lurking in your background?
Well, I've done a little bit of work with the Genealogical Society in San Elizario. They have a rich history down there.
Yes.
From on the border.
First Thanksgiving.
Yeah, and
that's next weekend.
Miguel Terran and his family, some of that members of that family in my classes, and I've done workshops with them about how to organize your photographs. How to organize your photographs and put names on the back of them and dates the best you can remember.
Absolutely.
Very important for future
absolutely.
generations.
And names, because at some point you may forget the names of these people.
The older I get, the more names I'm forgetting. Thanks for being with us.
I so appreciate being on the show.
Well, I'm glad that you were able to come, and I'm glad I met you at the Black Round Table several weeks ago. Well, thanks for tuning in. To me, this was a fun show, and I hope you enjoyed it just as much as I have enjoyed it with our special guest, whatever his name might be. Thanks for watching. I'm Leon Blevins.